Mrs. Ashford, I need you to come to my studio as soon as possible. Please, it's urgent." There was something in his tone that made me set down my pen immediately. Thomas had photographed dozens of weddings over his 18-year career. He was calm, professional, unflappable. This wasn't that voice. This was shaky, uncertain, almost frightened. "Is everything all right with the photos? Did something happen to the files?" "No, ma'am. The photos are fine. Actually, they're too fine. I found something when I was editing the album. Something you need to see before anyone else does." My heart started pounding. I closed my laptop and stood up, already reaching for my car keys. "What did you find, Thomas?" "I can't explain this over the phone, Mrs. Ashford. Please, can you come now? And please don't mention this to Sebastian yet. Not until you see what I'm talking about. But deep down, in that place where mothers know things they don't want to know, I suspected this had something to do with Melissa, my new daughter-in-law. The woman I'd smiled at and hugged and welcomed into our family while feeling a knot in my stomach that I couldn't explain and couldn't ignore. I'd tried so hard to convince myself that feeling was just my own issue. That maybe I was being that mother, the one who thinks no woman is good enough for her son. That maybe it was cultural differences I wasn't understanding. That maybe it was just the grief still lingering from losing Richard 3 years ago, making me see problems where none existed. But that feeling never went away. Every time Melissa smiled at me with those perfect teeth and perfect manners, something felt off. Like watching a play where all the actors know their lines, but none of them mean the words they're saying. Thomas's studio was in a converted warehouse with high ceilings and exposed brick. When I walked in, he was pacing near his editing station. He looked exhausted, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly. He'd mentioned his Parkinson's diagnosis a few months back, but I'd never seen the tremor this pronounced. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, gesturing to a chair beside his massive computer monitor. "Please sit down. I debated for 2 days whether to call you, but I kept thinking, if this was my daughter Emily, I'd want someone to tell me." "Thomas, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He took a deep breath and turned to his computer, clicking through folders until he pulled up a series of high-resolution images from the wedding. "I shoot thousands of frames at every wedding. Most people never see 90% of them. I take multiple shots of every moment, every angle, especially during the ceremony and reception. It's how I make sure I capture everything." He pulled up an image of Melissa standing at the altar beside Sebastian. My son looked radiant, his eyes full of love and hope. But Thomas zoomed in on Melissa's face. "This was taken during the vows. Look at her expression. More specifically, look at where she's looking." Thomas zoomed out and highlighted a man sitting in the 3rd row. Young, Asian American, maybe late 20s. Handsome in a casual, artistic way. I vaguely remembered seeing him at the reception. "That's Derek Huang. I did some research after I noticed the pattern in the photos. He's a freelance photographer. Melissa introduced him to people as an old college friend." Thomas clicked to another set of images, these from the reception. Melissa standing near a marble column, checking her phone. Thomas zoomed in on the screen. The resolution was incredible. I could read the text message displayed there. "Still yours if you want it. Say the word." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Thomas clicked through more images. Melissa and Derek exchanging glances across the crowded reception hall. A moment near the bar where their hands touched, just briefly, but with an intimacy that was unmistakable. A shot of Derek watching Melissa dance with Sebastian, and the look on Derek's face was pure longing. "There's more," Thomas said quietly. He pulled up a series of photos from earlier in the day, during the cocktail hour. "I caught them talking alone in the hallway outside the restrooms. Look at the body language." In the images, Melissa and Derek stood close together, closer than old friends would stand. Derek's hand was on the wall beside Melissa's head. Her face was tilted up toward his. It wasn't a kiss, but it was the moment right before or right after one. The intimacy between them was so obvious, it made my chest hurt. I thought maybe I was reading too much into it, Thomas continued. So I looked him up, found his social media, found Melissa's old posts before she cleaned them up. They dated for 3 years. The relationship supposedly ended about 6 months before she met Sebastian, but he pulled up screenshots on another monitor, messages between Melissa and Derek, recovered from public Instagram comments that hadn't been deleted. These are from after her engagement to your son. They're coded, but once you know to look for them, it's obvious. I sat back in the chair, my mind reeling. Comment after comment, posts with hidden meanings, likes and responses that told a story of a relationship that had never really ended. Why are you showing me this? I asked, though I already knew. Why not Sebastian? Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair. Because I'm a father, Mrs. Ashford. My Emily is 26. If she were in Sebastian's position, I'd want someone to tell me first, to give me time to figure out how to handle it, to gather more information if needed, to be able to cushion the blow. He met my eyes, and I saw genuine compassion there. And because I saw you at the wedding, I've photographed enough ceremonies to read people pretty well. You were happy for Sebastian, but every time you looked at Melissa, I saw something in your expression. Doubt, maybe, or worry, like you felt something was off but couldn't put your finger on it. I'd blamed myself for that feeling, told myself I was being paranoid, overprotective, maybe even unconsciously prejudiced. Richard's sudden death 3 years ago had left me hyper-vigilant about threats and dangers, always looking for the other shoe to drop. I'd questioned my own instincts constantly, afraid of becoming the kind of mother who drove her children away with suspicion and control. I already prepared a folder. It's encrypted. I'll email you the password separately. Thomas paused, his hand hovering over the mouse. Mrs. Ashford, I want to be clear about something. I'm not making accusations. Maybe there's an explanation for all of this. Maybe Derek is just an ex who can't let go, and Melissa has been trying to handle it quietly. Maybe those looks were caught at unfortunate angles. But you don't believe that, I finished. No, ma'am, I don't. And more importantly, I don't think you do either. My son, my sweet, brilliant, trusting son, who had fallen so completely in love with this woman, who had spent 14 months planning a future with her, who had stood at that altar 1 week ago with tears in his eyes, promising forever to someone who was looking at someone else. I wanted to call him immediately, to warn him, protect him, save him from whatever this was. But Thomas was right. I needed more information. I needed to be absolutely certain before I destroyed my son's marriage a week after his wedding. I needed to know if I was seeing a real threat or if my grief-sharpened instincts were making me paranoid. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands and opened my laptop. The encrypted folder from Thomas was already in my inbox. I spent 3 hours going through every single image, every screenshot, every piece of evidence he'd compiled. By the time I finished, the sun was setting over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, beautiful and indifferent to the pain unfolding in my apartment. I picked up my phone and made a call I never thought I'd make. The detective agency came highly recommended by my attorney. Private investigations for sensitive family matters. Discretion guaranteed. The woman who answered assured me they could have someone on the case by morning. I need to know everything about my son's wife, I said, hating how those words sounded. Her relationship history, her current communications, whether she's seeing someone. I have evidence that suggests infidelity, but I need confirmation before I tell him. I hung up and stared at my phone, wondering if I should call Sebastian. He'd been texting me all week with updates about married life, about how happy he was, about plans for their future. Each message felt like a knife in my chest. Instead, I opened my laptop and looked at the wedding photos again. This time, I saw other things I'd missed. The way Melissa's smile never quite reached her eyes when she was with Sebastian's friends. The careful distance she maintained from me in every photo, even the family portraits. The moment during the father-daughter dance where she looked sad rather than joyful, and I suddenly realized she was watching Derek leave the reception early. My phone buzzed. Sebastian. Hey, Mom. Mel and I are heading to your neighborhood for dinner tomorrow. Want to join us? Maria at 7? And now Sebastian wanted to share it with Melissa, this woman who might be betraying him in the worst possible way. I texted back. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. I'll make a reservation for 3. And I'd have to decide when and how to tell Sebastian that his marriage might already be over before it truly began. Growing up in Boston, in a modest 3-bedroom house, I learned early that appearances could be deceiving. My mother would always insist on immaculate table settings, even when dinner was just meatloaf on chipped china, and my father could turn the heat off in December without a twitch of guilt if it meant paying for my piano lessons. Every Saturday was spent dusting shelves dotted with Goodwill finds arranged just so, to fool any neighbor who wandered in. My sense of presentation, the urge to keep up facades for the world, was woven into me before I ever understood why. It's probably why I did so well in finance, in boardrooms where reading below the surface could mean the difference between security and disaster. It's also why I learned to mistrust my own gut. You spend 50 years learning to be the person everyone expects. You get trained, socialized, even praised for accommodating, for fitting in. I climbed every rung with strategy. Harvard on a scholarship, consulting for Boston's first tech boom startups, then the volatile 90s in New York. My intuition was sharp. I could spot a failing deal from across the room, sense a client wavering in the subtlest twitch of a mouth. But that surveillance never stopped, sometimes following me home, sometimes seeping into my relationships. It cost me friendships, a first engagement. I made my fortune, but I often paid with sleep. When I met Richard, I thought finally, someone who allowed me to relax. He was an engineer, steady, loyal, the kind of man who shyly handed me flowers after meetings and never forgot my mother's birthday, even years after we married. Marrying late was a choice. After 3 miscarriages, Sebastian's birth at 38 felt like a miracle. Suddenly, all my hard-earned intuition focused onto a single point: protecting my son, building a fortress of certainty around him in a world I knew could turn on a dime. Losing Richard to a heart attack in our hallway while Sebastian was at MIT hit me differently than the market collapsing or being outmaneuvered in a negotiation. You can fix a portfolio. You can't resuscitate a future you'd wrapped your soul around. For months I drifted, learning the routines of grief, wake, function, sleep. I soldiered through, rebuilt my life around Sebastian. He was brilliant, kind, so much Richard in his way of looking for the good in people. Maybe I tried too hard to shield him from pain, taking his burdens as if I could absorb them just as easily as I absorbed financial risk. Sebastian's first serious heartbreak was at 23, a San Francisco girl who left for Berlin. He buried himself in code, graduated with honors, and landed a role at a rising Manhattan startup. Our relationship shifted then from parent and child to equals. At least, that's what I told myself. In truth, I hovered. I filled his freezer, convinced him to see a therapist, checked his bank balances when I thought he wasn't paying attention. He let me, graciously, perhaps out of habit, or perhaps because part of him needed to know someone was still holding the net. I didn't meet Melissa until he'd been seeing her for almost 6 months. He'd mentioned a friend from work, but I'd sensed a change in him. Lighter, sometimes lost in thought, and smiling in a way that reminded me of teenage Sebastian before his father died. He invited me for dinner at a tiny Williamsburg bistro. The anxiety in his text, "You'll like her, Mom, I promise," felt like a warning. I wish I'd saved it, not for proof, but to hold as evidence of what he'd hoped. Melissa was flawless on paper. Columbia graduate, moved into tech marketing after a stint in visual arts. She'd even worked on campaigns I recognized. Her handshake was cool, her language precise. She complimented my necklace, remembered details from our conversation to bring up later. As we talked that night, she made perfect eye contact, laughed at appropriate moments. But something in those moments, it always felt measured. She was reading me as skillfully as I read her. Back in my apartment, I replayed the evening, searching my memory for whatever was bothering me. There were no red flags, not really. Yet the part of me that noticed things, that kept portfolios safe and hearts away from grief, prickled. She'd mentioned her family background only in the vaguest terms. My parents are working a lot. They're in Queens. It's just the three of us, me, Mom, and Dad. We're not close. She brushed off deeper conversation with a smile. I made a mental note but said nothing. God, how much easier it is to see patterns in retrospect. Sebastian called the next day, excited. I told her you'd like her, didn't I? I told him I did, because I wanted to believe it. Each gathering afterwards, she was present, attentive, charming. She learned my favorite white wine, sent me a small Christmas gift, a subscription to a virtual ballet series because I'd told her how I'd danced when young. Kindnesses strategized with the effectiveness of a seasoned networker. 2 months later, we met for dinner again. She and Sebastian had just come back from a weekend upstate. I saw them enter from across the restaurant. She was holding his arm, but at the table her phone rarely left her side. It buzzed during dessert. She smiled, apologizing. Just my mother checking in. She typed quickly under the table. I told myself to let it go. When Sebastian went to get the car, I was left with her in the vestibule. You're good for him, I'd said. And she smiled, but her gaze darted quickly towards the bar and then back to me. If I hadn't been watching, I'd have missed it altogether. I did what so many women do. I rationalized. I thought about my own nervousness at Sebastian's age, the awkwardness of meeting a significant other's family, the pressure of trying to be enough. I tried to see Melissa through a softer lens. Maybe she was simply nervous. Maybe she didn't have sisters or aunts to guide her through the rituals of engagement. I didn't know until months later about her past with Derek that she'd left a piece of her life unfinished. Sebastian only ever spoke of her exes in vague terms, dismissing their importance. They just didn't get her, he said once, protective, blind in the way young men in love often are. I asked questions gently. She's complicated, he replied with a smile, but she's worth it. When the engagement was announced, I threw myself into the planning, grateful for the distraction and the purpose. Sebastian wanted a Manhattan wedding, something grand but not ostentatious. We toured venues together, debated between menus, set up meetings with florists. Melissa was engaged in every detail, but never controlling. Her taste was impeccable, and she deferred to my preferences easily. Victoria, you have such good instincts. I trust you. It delighted and unnerved me equally. Even as the months ticked closer to the date, that uncertainty flickered in quiet moments. The night before the wedding, I lay awake replaying every conversation, every glance I'd caught. I watched the moonlit city, remembering Richard's laughter, the way he danced with Sebastian in the kitchen, his certainty about people. Would he have sensed what I did about Melissa? Or would he have told me I was overthinking? If I sound obsessed, it's because mothers learn to live with a constant stream of worry for their children. We're trained to ignore it, but it's always there. I'd seen relationships fall apart spectacularly among my friends, infidelities, betrayals, families irreparably damaged by secrets everyone saw but no one admitted. I refused to be the one who saw and did nothing. Yet I also feared being the one to act and tear everything apart for nothing. Looking back, the final weeks before the wedding feel like a fever dream. There were happy moments. Sebastian humming in the kitchen as he baked bread, Melissa showing me swatches for bridesmaid dresses. Sometimes glimmers of authenticity shone through, and I'd scold myself for being unkind, suspicious. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? My son safe, building his life, finally moving beyond the shadow of grief that had hovered over us for so long. I wanted to believe it was as perfect as it appeared. But there were small things that chipped at my certainty. One afternoon, I stopped by their apartment unannounced to drop off a wedding contract Sebastian had forgotten. Melissa let me in, her smile tight. A duffel bag was lying in the hallway. When I asked, she blushed and said she was off to a yoga retreat that weekend. She left minutes later, barely looking at me. Something felt unfinished about the apartment, like whoever lived there was always halfway out the door. I never told Sebastian my doubts. What mother does before she's certain. I watched, I waited. I searched Melissa's name when I was alone, scrolled through her old online posts, noting how her profiles had shifted during the months since they'd started dating. More curated, fewer candid shots, comments closed on anything older than a year. I convinced myself it was standard, privacy in the digital age. I tried to whisper my concerns to close friends, but they'd shrug and say all mothers worry. As the wedding day approached, my anxiety built beneath the surface, surfacing only in sleepless nights and unnecessary emails to the planner. The morning of the ceremony, I watched Sebastian tie his tie in my living room, shoulders square and proud, every inch Richard's son. "I'm ready, Mom," he said, and I wanted so desperately to believe it, to let myself rest, at least for a day. In the church vestibule, as guests gathered, I caught Melissa alone by the door, phone in hand, typing furiously. I tried to catch her eye. When she noticed me, she put the phone away, smiling too quickly. I kissed her cheek. "You look beautiful," I said, hoping my voice betrayed nothing. "Thank you, Victoria." And then she hurried to her bridesmaids, her veil billowing behind her. The ceremony itself was a haze. I watched my child promise his life to a woman I barely knew, in front of 200 friends and strangers. I ached with hope for him, for us. I listened to their vows, the promises of partnership, the poetry. If I noticed Melissa glance over Sebastian's shoulder, if I caught her eyes scanning the congregation, I shoved the thought down. Today, I would be nothing but supportive. I owed him that much. Reception followed as all weddings do, endless greetings, toasts, snapshots frozen in 1,000 pixels. My friends complimented every detail. Melissa thanked each guest with practiced grace. Sebastian looked happiest, lighter than I'd seen in years. He was in love, or so it seemed. Was it possible, I asked myself, that I was wrong? That I'd let my own history, my mistrust of perfection, taint what could be the happiest day of his life? I forced myself to relax, to dance under the shimmering lights, to hug Melissa and mean it. If I noticed Derek in the crowd, laughing with the younger guests, blending in seamlessly, I chalked it up to paranoia. The day wound down with laughter and wishes for forever. My son departed with his new wife, faces flushed with champagne, waving from the Uber as if stepping into a storybook. I watched until the car disappeared. Returning to my apartment, I allowed myself to hope, for a few hours, that this would be the start of something beautiful. I tried to silence that anxious voice in the back of my mind, urging me to dig deeper. I poured a final glass of wine and went to bed, repeating to myself that tomorrow was a new beginning for all of us. But I didn't sleep. I lay there, haunted by all I'd seen and all I hadn't, replaying every warning sign, every gut feeling I'd dismissed. I prayed to be wrong. I prayed for peace. Now, a week later, after that phone call from Thomas, everything makes sense. Every hesitation, every unfocused smile, every unexplained absence. The truth was always there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. The dinner at Maria was torture. Sebastian arrived beaming, holding Melissa's hand as they walked through the candlelit dining room. I stood to greet them, forcing a smile that felt like it would crack my face in half. Melissa kissed my cheek, her perfume cloying and sweet. "Victoria, you look wonderful," she said, her voice bright and easy. I wanted to scream. We ordered appetizers, made small talk about the honeymoon plans. Sebastian couldn't stop gushing about Bali, about the villa they'd booked overlooking the ocean. 3 weeks, Mom. Can you believe it? Melissa found this incredible deal. He squeezed her hand across the table, his eyes full of that devastating trust that only the very young or very naive possess. Melissa smiled back at him, but I saw it now. The slight delay before her expression matched his enthusiasm. The way her gaze flickered briefly toward her phone when it buzzed in her purse. "That sounds amazing, sweetheart," I managed, sipping my wine too quickly. The waiter brought our entrees. I barely tasted the branzino on my plate. Every fiber of my being wanted to pull Sebastian aside to show him Thomas's photos right there in the restaurant. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not without more proof. Not without knowing exactly how deep this betrayal went. Melissa excused herself to the restroom halfway through dinner. The moment she was out of earshot, Sebastian leaned forward, his face glowing with happiness. "Mom, I know you had some reservations about Melissa at first, but I'm so glad you've come around. She really respects you, you know. She talks about you all the time." My throat tightened. "Sebastian, I mean it. I know it's been hard for you since Dad died. I know you worry. But Melissa makes me happy in a way I didn't think was possible anymore. I feel like I can breathe again, you know?" I did know. That's what made this so unbearable. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I just want you to be happy, sweetheart. That's all I've ever wanted." When Melissa returned, her phone was in her hand. She set it face down on the table, but not before I caught a glimpse of the screen. A text notification. The name at the top, D. My stomach turned. She caught me looking and quickly turned the phone over again, smiling brightly. "Sorry, work emergency. You know how it is." The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced conversation. When they finally left, Sebastian hugging me tightly at the curb, I stood on the sidewalk and watched their cab disappear into traffic. Then I walked 4 blocks to clear my head before calling my car service. At home, I poured myself a scotch, Richard's favorite, a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion that never came, and opened my laptop. The detective agency had sent their preliminary report earlier that day. I'd been too afraid to open it during work hours, too afraid of what I might find. Now, alone in my apartment with the city lights glittering below, I clicked the attachment. The report was devastating in its thoroughness. Martin Cooper, the investigator, had spent 5 days following Melissa. The timeline was damning. 2 days after the wedding, she'd met Derek at a coffee shop in Astoria. They'd sat close, their body language intimate. Martin had photos from across the street, grainy but clear enough. Derek's hand on Melissa's knee. Melissa leaning into him, her face in profile showing an expression I'd never seen her wear around Sebastian. Open, vulnerable, real. 3 days later, another meeting, this time at a bar in Williamsburg. They'd stayed for 2 hours, leaving separately, but both heading in the direction of Derek's apartment building. Martin hadn't followed them inside, didn't need to. The pattern was obvious. The report included screenshots of text messages Martin had obtained through what he vaguely described as standard surveillance methods. I didn't ask for details. The messages were explicit, not sexually, but emotionally. Derek writing, "I can't keep doing this. You're married now. It's killing me." Melissa responding, "I know. I'm sorry. I just need time to figure this out. I do love you. You know I do." Another exchange from the night before my dinner with them at Maria. "He wants to start trying for a baby right away. I don't know what to do." Derek, "Tell him the truth or leave him, but don't drag me through this anymore." I read the messages 3 times, each word cutting deeper. My son, my brilliant, loving, trusting son, had married a woman who was planning her escape route even as she smiled across the dinner table at me. Or worse, planning to trap him with a child while maintaining her affair. The financial section of the report was equally revealing. Martin had accessed public records showing Melissa's student loan debt, $83,000. Credit card debt, another $22,000. She'd been making minimum payments for years, her salary barely covering expenses. 2 months before the engagement, she'd stopped making payments altogether. The day after Sebastian proposed, she'd consolidated everything into a single loan and made a lump payment of $30,000. I didn't need to guess where that money came from. Sebastian had access to a trust fund Richard and I had established. He could withdraw for major life events: an engagement ring, a down payment on an apartment, helping his fiancée with debt. He was generous to a fault, my son. It would never have occurred to him to question whether Melissa loved him or loved his bank account. The next morning, I called Martin. "I need more," I said without preamble. "I need enough evidence that he can't rationalize it away, that she can't talk herself out of. Can you do that?" "Mrs. Ashford, I've already given you proof of infidelity and financial motivation. What more do you need?" "I need her to have no way out, no explanation that sounds even remotely plausible. I paused, hating what I was about to say. "I need to destroy any possibility that my son will forgive her and try to make this work." There was a long silence. "That'll cost you more." "I don't care. Do it." Martin called me 2 days later. "I've got something. You're not going to like it." He emailed me a video file. I opened it on my tablet, my hands shaking. The footage was from a building security camera, dated 3 nights ago, 2 days after my dinner with Sebastian and Melissa. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. The location, according to Martin's notes, was Derek's apartment building in Queens. The video showed Melissa entering through the lobby, glancing around nervously before heading to the elevator. She was wearing the green dress I'd complimented at dinner, the one Sebastian had bought her for their anniversary. She carried an overnight bag. The timestamp jumped to 7:23 a.m. the next morning. Melissa exiting the building, her hair pulled back, wearing different clothes, casual, clearly borrowed from someone larger. Derek's clothes. She looked exhausted and somehow lighter, like she'd shed a burden. She checked her phone and smiled at something on the screen before hailing a cab. I closed the tablet and sat in the darkness of my living room, feeling something inside me harden into resolve. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. This wasn't about a mother's paranoid overprotection. This was about saving my son from a woman who was using him, betraying him, and planning to lock him into a life built on lies. I called Thomas. "I need you to send me everything. Every photo, every angle, every shot you took at the wedding, especially anything with Derek in the frame." "Mrs. Ashford, I already sent you. I need the raw files, all of them. Can you do that?" He agreed, though I heard the worry in his voice. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to tell my son the truth, and I'm making sure I have every piece of evidence so he can't convince himself I'm wrong." The files arrived that evening. I spent hours going through them, organizing them chronologically. I created a presentation, slide after slide of damning images. Melissa looking at Derek during the ceremony, the text message on her phone, Derek watching her during the first dance, the two of them in that hallway, bodies close, his hand on the wall beside her head. I added timestamps, context, annotations. Then I added Martin's surveillance photos, the coffee shop, the bar, the overnight bag, the morning after. Finally, I added the financial records, the debt, the payment, the timeline that showed exactly when Melissa's money problems had been solved by my son's trust fund. I saved everything to a USB drive and a cloud backup. Then I sat at my desk, staring at my phone, trying to find the courage to make the call. Sebastian texted me first. "Hey, Mom, Mel and I are coming by tomorrow afternoon. We have some news. Can you be home around 2? My heart sank. News. I could guess what kind of news. I texted back, "Of course, sweetheart, I'll be here." The next morning, I could barely function. I canceled my afternoon meetings, claiming a migraine. I wasn't lying. My head throbbed with the weight of what I was about to do. I kept rehearsing different approaches. Should I show him the evidence immediately? Should I try to ease into it? Should I confront Melissa first, give her a chance to leave quietly? But I knew my son. If I gave Melissa any warning, any chance to craft a story, she'd find a way to manipulate the situation. She'd cry, apologize, promise to do better. She'd get pregnant immediately, if she wasn't already, and Sebastian would convince himself that staying was the right thing to do, for the child. I couldn't let that happen. At 1:45 p.m., I heard their key in the lock. I'd given Sebastian a key to my apartment years ago, back when he was in college and needed a place to crash between exams. He'd kept it. They let themselves in, their voices bright and cheerful in the foyer. "Mom," Sebastian called. "We're here!" I walked out from my study, forcing my face into a neutral expression. Melissa was glowing, her hand protectively on her stomach. Oh, God, I already knew. "Sit down, both of you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to talk to you before you say anything." Sebastian's smile faltered. "Mom, is everything okay? You look—" "Sit down." The sharpness in my tone made them both freeze. They exchanged glances, then moved to the couch. Melissa's hand tightened on Sebastian's arm. I picked up the USB drive from the coffee table where I'd left it. A week ago, Thomas Brennan called me. He found something in the wedding photos that disturbed him enough to reach out. I kept my eyes on Sebastian. I couldn't look at Melissa without losing my composure. "He showed me evidence that suggested your wife was having an affair." "What? Mom, that's—" Sebastian started to stand, his face flushing with anger. I said, "Sit down." My voice cracked like a whip. "I know you don't want to hear this. I know you think I'm being paranoid or controlling or whatever story you've been telling yourself about why I've never warmed up to Melissa. But I hired a private investigator. I had him follow your wife for a week. And what he found—" I stopped, steadying my breathing. "What he found proves that she's been lying to you from the beginning." Melissa's face had gone white. "Victoria, I don't know what you think you found, but—" "Derek Huang." I said the name like a curse. "Photographer. Your ex-boyfriend. The man you've been sleeping with for the entire duration of your relationship with my son." The silence that followed was deafening. Sebastian stared at me, his expression shifting from anger to confusion to something that looked like fear. "Derek? The guy from the wedding? He's just a friend from—" "He's not just a friend." I plugged the USB drive into my laptop and turned the screen toward them. "This is from the wedding. Watch." I played the slideshow. Image after image of Melissa looking at Derek, the text message, the hallway moment. Sebastian's face crumbled with each photo. Melissa started crying, her hands shaking. "Sebastian, I can explain." "Then there's this." I showed them Martin's surveillance photos. The coffee shop meeting 2 days after the wedding, the bar, the overnight bag, the morning after walk of shame in Derek's clothes. Sebastian stood abruptly, stumbling backward. No, this is— There has to be an explanation." "Melissa, tell her. Tell her this is all some mistake." Melissa was sobbing now, her carefully constructed facade shattered. "Sebastian, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I love you, I do, but Derek and I have history, and I thought I could just move on, but you couldn't," I finished coldly. "Because you never tried. You chose my son for his money and his stability while keeping your real relationship alive on the side. You used him." "That's not true," Melissa shouted, turning to Sebastian with desperate eyes. "Baby, please, you have to understand. It's complicated. Yes, Derek and I had history, but what we have is real. I married you because I love you. I want to build a life with you." "Then why?" Sebastian's voice broke. "Why were you with him 3 nights ago? Why were you texting him during our honeymoon planning? Why—" He looked at her stomach, then at me. "Mom, she's pregnant. We were going to tell you today. We're having a baby." The words hung in the air. Melissa's tears stopped abruptly, her face calculating even through the emotion. I saw her realize what Sebastian had just given her, an escape route, a way to make him stay. "Exactly," she said, her voice suddenly firm. "We're having a baby, Sebastian. Your baby, Our baby. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I should have cut Derek off completely. But I'm pregnant now. We're starting a family. Doesn't that mean something? I watched my son's face, saw him wanting so desperately to believe her, saw him reaching for any rationalization that would make sense of this nightmare. Sebastian, I said quietly, don't let her do this to you. You deserve better than someone who traps you with a pregnancy after being caught. Trap him? Melissa's voice turned shrill. I'm not trapping anyone. I'm pregnant with your grandchild, Victoria, your flesh and blood. Are you really going to tear apart this family over some photos and paranoid accusations? They're not accusations. I pulled up the final piece of evidence, the financial records. You had over $100,000 in debt that magically disappeared right after you got engaged. Sebastian paid that off for you, didn't he? Out of his trust fund? Sebastian's face told me I was right. Melissa looked away. You married him for money, I said, each word deliberate. You kept Derek on the side for emotional fulfillment, and now you're trying to use a pregnancy to make sure Sebastian can't leave. That's not love. That's exploitation. Melissa stood, her face twisted with rage and tears. You've hated me from day one. You've never given me a chance. You're a controlling, bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son happy with someone else. Melissa, stop. Sebastian tried to intervene, but she was on a roll. She's been looking for any excuse to get rid of me. This entire thing is probably fabricated. How do I know those photos aren't manipulated? How do I know this investigator isn't lying? You have money, Victoria. You could have paid anyone to say anything. I expected that. From my desk drawer, I pulled out a printed report, the paternity test authorization form I'd prepared that morning. Fine. Let's settle this scientifically. If that baby is Sebastian's, I'll apologize for everything. I'll welcome you back with open arms. But if there's even a chance it's Derek's, you owe it to my son to find out before he commits to raising another man's child. Melissa's face went from red to white. You can't force me to take a paternity test. No, I agreed, but Sebastian can request one. And if you refuse, I looked at my son, then you'll know I'm right. Sebastian sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I can't. I need time to think. Melissa, I need you to leave. Please. Sebastian, leave! He shouted it, his voice breaking. Just get out! I need to be alone with my mom, please! Melissa looked between us, her expression shifting through several emotions before settling on cold calculation. Fine, but when you come to your senses, when you realize your mother is manipulating you, I'll be waiting. I love you, Sebastian. I love our baby. That's not going to change. She grabbed her purse and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The silence she left behind was suffocating. Sebastian sat there staring at nothing. I moved to sit beside him, but he held up a hand to stop me. Did you know? Before the wedding, did you know? I suspected, I admitted, but I didn't have proof, and I was afraid. I was afraid you'd hate me for interfering. I might hate you anyway, he whispered. Then he started crying, deep, broken sobs that shook his whole body. I wrapped my arms around him, and for the first time since he was a child, my son let me hold him while he fell apart. We sat there for hours as the sun set over Manhattan, the city lights flickering on one by one, and I knew, with terrible certainty, that this was only the beginning. Sebastian stayed with me for 3 days. He slept in his old bedroom, the one I'd kept exactly as he'd left it when he moved out for college. Posters of obscure indie bands still on the walls, his collection of vintage science fiction novels lining the shelves. He barely spoke, barely ate. I'd find him staring out the window at Central Park, his phone face down on the dresser, ignoring the dozens of calls and texts from Melissa. On the morning of the 4th day, he finally emerged from his room with a determination I recognized. It was the same look Richard used to get when he'd made a difficult decision and was ready to act on it. I want the paternity test, he said without preamble, Can you help me arrange it? Relief flooded through me. Of course. I'll call my attorney right now. And Mom? He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I need you to be honest with me. If that baby is mine, what do I do? How do I raise a child with someone I can't trust? I had no answer for him. I pulled him into a hug instead, and we stood there in my kitchen, holding on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. My attorney, Patricia Chen, had handled my estate planning for 15 years. She was sharp, efficient, and had seen enough family drama to remain unshockable. When I explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. I'll draft a letter today requesting Melissa submit to a prenatal paternity test. If she refuses, Sebastian can petition the court, but that'll take time and create a public record. Better if we can convince her to do it voluntarily. And if the baby isn't his? Then Sebastian files for an annulment on grounds of fraud. Clean break. New York law is pretty clear on marriages entered into under false pretenses, especially when there's documented infidelity. The letter was delivered to Melissa's office by courier that afternoon. Patricia made it clear: submit to testing within 72 hours or face legal consequences. Sebastian insisted on being the one to text her afterward, a simple message. This is happening. You can do it the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. Her response came within minutes. A wall of text, apologies, explanations, accusations, pleas for understanding. Sebastian deleted it without reading past the first line. Then he blocked her number. I can't, he said, his voice hollow. I can't keep letting her manipulate me. If she wants to talk, she can talk through lawyers. I'd never been prouder of him. Melissa agreed to the test. Patricia arranged everything through a certified medical facility, ensuring the results would be legally admissible. The wait was excruciating. 7 to 10 business days, they said. Each day felt like a month. Sebastian threw himself into work, spending 16-hour days at his startup's office, coming home only to sleep. I worried about him, but I also understood. He needed distraction, needed to feel in control of something. On day 6, my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I jerked awake, heart pounding. Sebastian's name on the caller ID. Mom. His voice was thick with emotion. I can't sleep. I keep thinking, what if it is mine? What if I have to spend the rest of my life co-parenting with someone who destroyed me? Then we'll figure it out, I said, sitting up in bed. You won't be alone in this. Whatever happens, I'm here. I loved her, Mom. I really did. How did I not see it? How was I so blind? You weren't blind, sweetheart. You were trusting. That's not a character flaw. That's what makes you a good person. She's the one who failed, not you. We talked until dawn, and somewhere in those hours, I felt my son beginning to heal. Not completely, that would take time. But the raw, bleeding wound was starting to scab over. The results came on day 9. Patricia called me first, her tone carefully neutral. Victoria, I have the paternity test results. I'm sending them to Sebastian now, but I wanted to give you a heads up. My stomach clenched. Is he the father? A pause. No. According to the DNA analysis, Sebastian is definitively not the biological father. I closed my eyes, feeling a complicated mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief that my son wouldn't be tied to Melissa forever. Heartbreak for the grandchild I'd never meet, the innocent victim in all this mess. There's more, Patricia continued. The lab was able to run the fetal DNA against the database, its standard procedure when the presumed father is excluded. They found a match. Derek, I said flatly. Yes, Derek Huang. He's in the system from a previous background check for a commercial photography license. Melissa's baby is his. I thanked Patricia and hung up. Then I called Sebastian. He answered on the first ring. I just got the email from Patricia, he said. His voice was strange, not quite relieved, not quite devastated. Something in between. It's not mine. I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. Don't be. A long breath. Is that terrible? That I'm relieved? There's a baby out there who's innocent in all of this, and I'm relieved I'm not the father. That's not terrible. That's human. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel. I need to see her, he said suddenly. Melissa, I need to look her in the eye and hear her admit it. I need... His voice cracked. I need closure, Mom. Can you understand that? I did understand, and I also knew it was a terrible idea. But sometimes people need to make their own terrible decisions to move forward. Do you want me there with you? No. This is something I have to do alone. He met Melissa the next day at a coffee shop in Chelsea, neutral territory. She'd been calling him non-stop since the test results came through, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to accusatory. He'd listened to none of them. Patricia had advised him to record the conversation, so he wore a small recording device clipped to his collar, legal in New York, as long as one party consents. I waited at home, pacing my apartment, checking my phone every 30 seconds. He'd promised to call me when it was over. The call came after 90 minutes. I'm coming over, was all he said. When he arrived, his face was calm, but his eyes were hollow. He sat down at my kitchen table and stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. She admitted everything. The affair with Derek, the financial motivation, the pregnancy. He laughed bitterly. You want to know the worst part? She said she did love me, in her own way, that she thought she could make it work, having both of us. Derek for passion, me for security. She actually thought that was reasonable. I felt rage boiling in my chest, but kept my voice steady. What did you say? I told her I was filing for annulment, that I never wanted to see her again, that if she ever tried to contact me, I'd file a restraining order. He looked up at me, and I saw something new in his eyes, not just pain, but strength. She cried, said I was ruining her life, that Derek doesn't want the responsibility of a child, that she chose me because I was supposed to be the good guy who would stay. She chose you because she thought you were easy to manipulate, I said quietly. I know. I see that now. He pulled out his phone and played me the recording. Melissa's voice high and defensive. You think you're so perfect, Sebastian? You think your mother is some kind of saint? She poisoned you against me from the start. This is all her fault. I listened to my son's response, calm and final. My mother saw what I was too blind to see. She protected me when I wouldn't protect myself. This isn't her fault. This is yours. You made your choices. Now live with them. The recording ended. Sebastian looked at me with something like wonder. I never stood up to anyone like that before. Not even her, especially not her. It felt good. I squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you. I'm filing the annulment papers tomorrow. Patricia says it should be quick, given the circumstances. Melissa signed a prenup, so there's no financial dispute. In a few months, it'll be like the marriage never happened. But we both knew that wasn't true. The marriage had happened. The betrayal had happened. The pain had happened. We couldn't erase it. We could only move forward from it. The annulment process moved faster than I expected. Patricia filed the paperwork within 48 hours, citing fraud and misrepresentation. With the paternity test results, the prenuptial agreement, and Sebastian's recorded conversation with Melissa, there was little room for contestation. Melissa's attorney, a young associate from a midtown firm, tried to negotiate, but Patricia shut him down immediately. Your client lied about the paternity of her child, engaged in an ongoing affair throughout the relationship, and married my client under demonstrably false pretenses. Unless you want this to become public record with all the evidence attached, I suggest she sign the papers and walk away. Melissa signed 3 weeks after the confrontation. The marriage was annulled as if it had never existed. Sebastian was free. But freedom, I learned, doesn't erase pain. It just gives you space to feel it. He moved back into his Brooklyn apartment but couldn't stand being there. Too many memories of Melissa, he said. The way she'd arranged the throw pillows, her coffee mug still in the cabinet, her shampoo in the shower. He'd come to my place instead, sometimes staying for days at a time. We'd sit together watching old movies, not really watching them, just existing in the same space. "I keep thinking about what you said," he told me one evening. We were on my terrace, the city spread out below us like a constellation. "About how you suspected something from the beginning. I've been going back through everything, every conversation, every moment, and I can see it now. The way she'd changed the subject when I asked about her family, how she never really integrated with my friends. That time she got defensive when I suggested we open a joint bank account. Sebastian, you can't torture yourself with hindsight. But I should have seen it, Mom. You saw it. Thomas saw it. I was the only one who didn't. You saw what you wanted to see. That's not a failing. That's being human." He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know if I can trust anyone again. How do you let someone in when you know they might be lying about everything?" I had no answer for him because I'd been asking myself the same question for 3 years since Richard died. How do you trust impermanence when you've learned how quickly everything can disappear? 2 months after the annulment, on a cold February morning, my doorman called up. "Mrs. Ashford, there's a young woman here asking to see you. Says her name is Melissa Chen. Should I send her up?" My heart rate spiked. "No. Tell her I'm not available. She says it's urgent. Something about... She says she needs to apologize in person." I closed my eyes, weighing my options. Part of me wanted nothing more than to never see her face again. But another part, the part that had spent 57 years reading people, anticipating moves, staying 3 steps ahead, wanted to know what she was really after. "Send her up." I had 5 minutes to prepare myself. I changed out of my loungewear into a tailored dress and heels, fixed my hair, applied lipstick. This would not be a casual conversation between family. This would be a negotiation, and I needed armor. When the elevator opened, Melissa stepped out. She looked terrible. Her face was puffy, hair unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was visibly pregnant now, maybe 5 months along. She wore loose yoga pants and an oversized sweater that couldn't hide her condition. "Victoria," she said, her voice small. "Thank you for seeing me." I didn't invite her to sit, didn't offer coffee or water, just stood in my foyer with my arms crossed, waiting. "I know you hate me," she began, tears already forming. "I know I don't deserve your time or your forgiveness, but I needed to come here and tell you that you were right about everything." "I don't need your validation," I said coldly. "What do you want?" I need you to understand why I did what I did." "I understand perfectly. You wanted financial security. My son provided that. You wanted emotional connection. Derek provided that. You thought you could have both. You were wrong." She flinched. "It's more complicated than that." "It really isn't. Please." She was crying openly now. "Just let me explain. Then I'll leave and never bother your family again." Against my better judgment, I gestured to the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded over her stomach. I remained standing. "When I was 12, she began, my parents lost everything. We were living in a house in Flushing, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Then my dad's restaurant failed. We lost the house, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with my grandmother. I watched my mother work 3 jobs and still not have enough for groceries. I watched my father disappear into depression, barely able to function." I said nothing, my expression neutral. I swore I'd never be poor again, never be that helpless, that desperate. So I worked, I studied, I got scholarships, worked through college, landed a good job, but the debt. Student loans, credit cards from helping my parents, medical bills from when my mother got sick, it was drowning me. "And then you met my son," I said flatly, "and then I met Derek." She looked up at me. "I loved him, Victoria, really loved him. But he's an artist, A dreamer. He lives in a studio apartment, does freelance work, barely makes rent. I knew that if I stayed with him, I'd end up just like my mother, working myself to death, never secure, always one emergency away from disaster. So you chose Sebastian. So I met Sebastian. She corrected me, her voice defensive. Through work. And he was wonderful, kind, stable, successful. Everything Derek wasn't. I thought maybe I could learn to love him the way I loved Derek, that maybe security and stability would be enough. But it wasn't. No. She wiped her eyes. I tried. I really did. But Derek wouldn't let go, and I couldn't let go of him either. We'd break up, and then one of us would reach out, and we'd fall back into it. It was toxic and wrong, and I knew it, but I couldn't stop. You could have, I said. You could have been honest with Sebastian. You could have broken off the engagement. You could have chosen differently at any point. I was scared. Her voice rose. I was scared of being poor again. Scared of disappointing my parents. Scared that if I chose Derek, we'd end up resenting each other when we couldn't pay bills or build a real life. So instead, you built a life on lies. The silence that followed was heavy. Melissa stared at her hands. Why are you really here? I asked. What do you want from me? Derek doesn't want the baby. Her voice broke. When he found out I'd lied to Sebastian, that I'd tried to pass off his child as someone else's, he was disgusted. He said, I'm not the person he thought I was. He said he can't be with someone who could do something like that. So you've lost both of them. Yes. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I've lost everything. My marriage, my relationship with Derek, my self-respect. I'm 5 months pregnant and alone, and I needed you to know that you were right to protect Sebastian. He deserves better than what I could give him. I studied her face, looking for manipulation or calculation. All I saw was genuine devastation. Is that everything? I asked. I also wanted to ask. She hesitated. I know I have no right, but if there's any way, could you tell Sebastian that I'm sorry? That I never meant to hurt him like this? No. She blinked. What? I won't tell him anything. You hurt my son deeply. You betrayed his trust, used him for financial gain, and lied about the paternity of your child. He's finally starting to heal. I will not reopen that wound to deliver your apology. But if you want to apologize to Sebastian, you'll have to find another way to do it. But I strongly advise against it. The kindest thing you can do for him now is disappear from his life completely. Let him move on. Let him find someone who deserves him. Melissa's face crumpled. She stood, her movements awkward with the weight of pregnancy. You really do hate me. I don't hate you, I said, and I meant it. I pity you. You had choices, and you made the wrong ones at every turn. You prioritized security over integrity, and now you have neither. That's not my doing. That's yours. She walked to the elevator, shoulders hunched. Before the doors closed, she turned back to me. For what it's worth, Victoria, Sebastian is lucky to have you. I hope he knows that. The elevator doors slid shut. I stood there for a long moment, then walked to the bar and poured myself a generous scotch. My hands were shaking. I called Sebastian. He was at work, but he answered immediately. Mom, is everything okay? Melissa came to see me today. Silence. Then, what did she want? To apologize, to explain herself, to ask me to tell you she's sorry. And what did you say? I told her no. I told her the kindest thing she could do was leave you alone. Another silence, longer this time. Thank you. His voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for protecting me. Again. Always, sweetheart. Always. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Melissa's story, about the fear that had driven her choices. I understood it, in a way. I'd grown up poor too, had clawed my way to security through determination and strategic decisions. But I'd never betrayed someone's trust to get there. I'd never used another person as a means to an end. The difference, I realized, was that I'd been willing to sacrifice my own comfort for my principles. Melissa had been willing to sacrifice someone else's happiness for hers. A week later, Thomas Brennan called me. "Mrs. Ashford, I wanted to check in, see how Sebastian is doing." "He's healing," I said. "Slowly, but he's healing." "I'm glad. I've been feeling guilty about this whole situation. Like maybe if I'd kept my mouth shut, he could have been trapped in a lie for the rest of his life? Had his child raised alongside another man's baby, never knowing?" "No, Thomas. You did the right thing. It was hard, but it was right." "I hope so. My daughter got engaged last month, made me think about what I'd want someone to do if they knew she was being deceived." "You'd want them to tell you, just like you told me." "Yeah." A pause. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Ashford, and take care of that son of yours." "I will." Spring came slowly that year. Sebastian started seeing a therapist regularly, working through the betrayal and his trust issues. He took up running, joined a social group for young tech professionals, gradually rebuilt his life. He still had bad days, moments where I'd find him staring into space, lost in painful memories, but they became less frequent. One evening in April, we were having dinner at my place when he said, "I've been thinking about dating again." My heart lifted. "Really?" "Not seriously, not yet, but maybe just putting myself out there, seeing what happens." "I think that's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm scared, though. What if I can't tell the difference between someone real and someone like Melissa? What if my judgment is permanently broken?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "Your judgment isn't broken. You're just more careful now, more aware. That's not weakness, Sebastian. That's wisdom. Will you help me? If I start seeing someone seriously, will you tell me if you get any bad feelings? I know I didn't listen before, but I will now, I promise." Tears pricked my eyes. "Of course, but you need to trust yourself too. You're stronger now than you were. You know what to look for." He squeezed my hand. "I couldn't have gotten through this without you, Mom. You saved me." "You saved yourself," I said. "I just gave you the information. You made the hard choices." But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. I had saved him, in the way mothers do, by seeing danger before it fully materialized, by trusting my instincts even when they made me unpopular, by being willing to destroy a false happiness to make room for real healing. That night, after Sebastian left, I stood on my terrace and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Melissa was preparing for a child she'd raise alone. Derek was probably in his studio apartment, nursing his own regrets. And my son was driving home to Brooklyn, scarred but healing, broken but whole. I thought about Richard, about how proud he'd be of Sebastian's strength, how he'd probably tease me for my hovering, then thank me for it in the same breath. I missed him with an ache that never fully disappeared, but I felt his presence in moments like these, in the knowledge that we'd raised a good man together, a man who could survive betrayal and come out stronger. The wind picked up, cool against my face. Spring was here, with all its promises of renewal, and for the first time in months, I felt something like peace. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding my breath until almost a year had passed since that phone call from Thomas. Time didn't heal everything, but it did what time always does. It softened the edges, turned sharp panic into a dull ache, and then, slowly, into something livable. Life settled into a new rhythm. Sebastian kept going to therapy, kept running, kept showing up at work. The startup promoted him to lead engineer, then gave him equity in a new product line. He threw himself into it, but this time with a different kind of intensity. Less like he was running from something, and more like he was building toward something. One Sunday afternoon in late September, almost exactly a year after the wedding, he came over with a grocery bag in his hands. "I'm cooking," he announced, marching straight to my kitchen. "You're banned from lifting a finger." I watched him move around my kitchen, chopping garlic, boiling pasta, humming a song I didn't recognize. He looked older, not in a sad way, but in the way of someone who'd lost illusions and gained a spine. Over dinner, he cleared his throat. "So, there's someone I'd like you to meet." My fork paused midair. "Oh?" "Not today," he said quickly. "I promised myself I wouldn't ambush you again, or her, or myself, but I've been seeing someone for about 3 months. Her name is Claire." I set my fork down, studying his face. There was no manic glow this time, no desperate need for me to approve, just quiet certainty. "Tell me about her," I said. He smiled, small and genuine. "She's an engineer too. Grew up in Ohio, came to New York on a scholarship. She's smart, funny, brutally honest. She doesn't care about fancy restaurants. She cares about whether the people around her are decent." "Do you feel safe with her?" I asked. He thought about it, really thought. "Yeah, I do. I'm still scared sometimes, but she knows about Melissa, about everything. I told her on our 3rd date, actually. I wanted her to have the chance to run early." "And she didn't?" She said, "Well, at least I know you're not the cheater in that story." Then she asked if I wanted dessert. I laughed, surprising myself with how natural it felt. "I like her already." He glanced at me, suddenly a little boy again. "I want to do this differently this time, Mom. I don't want to rush you or me or anything. When you meet her, I want it to be because we're both sure it's the right time. And if you feel anything off, I want you to tell me, and I promise I'll listen, even if it hurts." "That's all I ever wanted," I said softly. "Not to run your life, just to be allowed to tell you what I see." He reached across the table and took my hand. "You saved me, Mom. I know it cost you too. You had to be the villain in my story for a while. I get that now." I didn't say what flashed through my mind, that I would choose to be the villain in his story 1,000 times over if it meant protecting him. Some truths belong only to mothers. A week later, I met Claire. She came to my apartment in jeans and a simple navy sweater, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers that looked refreshingly out of place in my meticulously arranged living room. "It's really nice to meet you, Mrs. Ashford," she said, a little nervous but steady. "Sebastian's told me a lot about you. All good, I promise." "Call me Victoria," I replied, "and if he's told you I'm controlling and overprotective, he's also telling the truth." She laughed, not awkwardly, but with genuine amusement. "He said you're the most perceptive person he knows, that you see things other people miss." I felt my chest tighten. That was new. That was him honoring the part of me he'd once resented. We spent 2 hours talking, not an interview, not an interrogation, just conversation. About her work, her childhood, the books she loved, the cities she wanted to visit. When Sebastian excused himself to take a call from his CEO, we were alone for the first time. "He told me what happened," she said quietly. "With Melissa, with the baby, all of it. I can't imagine how hard that was for both of you." "It was," I said. "It nearly broke him." "I know I'm not responsible for fixing that," she added quickly. "That's his work and yours. But I want you to know I respect what you did. A lot of parents would have turned a blind eye, or blamed their kids instead of the person who hurt them." I studied her face. Open, clear, no flinching. There was no performance here, no careful calculation behind the eyes. Just a woman who'd lived enough to understand that life could be messy and still worth showing up for. "Sebastian deserves honesty," I said. "No one's perfect. God knows I'm not. But he deserved to know the truth, even when it was ugly." "So do you," she replied. "You deserved better than being lied to in your own home. For what it's worth, I'm not going to lie to him. Or you. I can't promise we'll never hurt each other. We're human. But I can promise I won't do it on purpose, just to get what I want." It was such a simple, unvarnished statement. And somehow, it was exactly what I needed to hear. After they left that night, I stood at the window the way I had so many times in the past year. The city hummed below, indifferent and alive. I thought about Melissa again, not with rage this time, but with a kind of distant sadness. Somewhere out there, she was raising a child who would one day ask questions about his father, about his beginnings. She'd have to decide what story to tell, truth or lie, pain or pretense. I hoped for that child's sake that she chose better this time. Months passed. Claire became part of the landscape of our lives, not in a sudden, overwhelming way, but in small, steady increments. She joined us for Sunday dinners, helped Sebastian fix a leaky faucet in my guest bathroom, sent me links to articles about women in tech and late-in-life careers. One afternoon in early summer, Sebastian and I were walking through Central Park after brunch. The air was warm, the trees lush. "I have a question," he said, kicking at a stray pebble on the path. "Only one?" He smiled. "Do you think intuition is always right? Or did we just get lucky this time that yours was?" I thought about it. "I don't think intuition is magic," I said. "I think it's pattern recognition we've cultivated over a lifetime. Sometimes it's shaped by trauma and fear and gets distorted. Sometimes it's dead on. The trick is knowing which is which." "How do you know?" he asked. "You don't. Not always. You weigh it against facts. You check your biases. You talk to people you trust. With Melissa, my fear and my experience lined up. With Claire, my instinct is calm. Not excited, not suspicious, just calm." "That's a good word for it," he said. "Being with her feels calm. Not like fireworks, more like coming home after a long trip." I slipped my arm through his. "Then maybe your intuition is catching up to mine." He laughed. "Maybe it is." That night, alone in my apartment, I finally opened the folder on my laptop where I'd kept all the evidence: Thomas's photos, Martin's reports, the financial records. For almost a year, I'd left it untouched, like a sealed box of radioactive material I couldn't bring myself to dispose of. I clicked through a few images. Melissa's eyes locked on Derek during the vows. The text message on her phone, the hallway, the coffee shop. The blurry security footage of her entering his building late at night. Those images had once made me sick. Now they made me tired. Not in a defeated way, but in the way of someone who's looked at the same wound for too long and knows it's time to stop picking at the scab. I selected the folder and moved it to an encrypted archive. I didn't delete it entirely. Part of me, the risk manager, couldn't. But I buried it deep enough that I wouldn't stumble on it by accident. Some chapters you close. Others you just put back on the shelf and choose not to reread. On the anniversary of the wedding that no longer existed, Sebastian called me. "Do you realize what day it is?" he asked. "I do," I said. "Do you want to do something? Mark it somehow?" I thought of all the ways we could have honored the day. A therapy session, a ritual of release, a shared cry. "Come over," I said instead. "I'll cook." Over pasta and wine, we didn't pretend it was any other day. We talked about it, about what we'd learned, what we regretted, what we wouldn't change. Near the end of the meal, he raised his glass. "To you," he said. "To the woman who refused to let me live in a pretty lie." I raised mine. "To you, for doing the hard thing when it would have been so much easier to look away." We clinked glasses, and I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph. This was never about winning. Not vindication, though a small, sharp part of me had craved that at times. It was something quieter. Something like acceptance. Later that night, after he'd gone home to Brooklyn and texted me that he'd arrived safely, some things never change, I stood once more at my window. The city lights glowed, constant and indifferent as ever. I thought back to that first phone call from Thomas, to the fear in his voice, to the way my world had shifted in the span of a 20-minute drive downtown. I remembered how my hands had shaken over that first glass of wine as I opened the photos, how my heart had broken not just for my son, but for the version of myself that had wanted so desperately to be wrong. I wasn't wrong. And that, I realized now, was the hardest part. Not the betrayal, not the confrontation, not even the aftermath. The hardest part was living in a world where my worst suspicions could be right, and choosing to act on them anyway, knowing it would hurt someone I loved. But I'd do it again. Not because I enjoy being right, not because I wanted to be the hero of the story, but because motherhood, at its core, is a long series of impossible choices between their immediate happiness and their long-term safety, between comfort and truth, between letting them walk blind into traffic and grabbing their arm hard enough to leave a bruise. Sometimes love looks like planning weddings and writing checks and smiling for photos. Sometimes it looks like sitting in a stranger's studio while he shows you the one thing you never wanted to see. Sometimes it looks like pushing a USB drive across a coffee table and watching your child's world collapse, because you know what's built on lies will fall eventually, and better now, with you beside him, than later, when you might not be there to catch him. I turned away from the window and switched off the lights. In the dark, I whispered a quiet thank you. To Thomas for calling, to Patricia for fighting, to Sebastian for listening, to myself for not backing down. Then I went to bed, not with the restless, haunted sleep of that first week after the wedding, but with the steady breathing of someone who has walked through the fire, pulled her child out of it, and come out the other side still standing. Not unscarred, but standing.